These next problems are going to appear as one of the more extensive problems we're going to see. It's going to take more room on a page, but it's not necessarily going to be the more difficult. Focus on some of the fundamentals, and it's going to be actually fairly straightforward once we get used to some of the routine. The first thing I want to do is find the common denominator. When those aren't the same, we can't just try fudging anything. We can't just try making them the same. What we would need to do is factor, just like that prime factorization I told us in that last review problem. This one happens to be a difference of squares. A plus 1, a minus 1. That's convenient. Over here, remember when I have no constant, I end up wanting a GCF. Factor out an a, and remember if I distribute that a times a is a squared, a times 1 is a, factoring out that GCF. Now, when I look at for a common denominator, remember to get an LCD, what I really want to look for is what's missing. When I look for what's missing here, over here I have an a plus 1, an a minus 1. Over here I have an a and an a plus 1. It's that a plus 1 that's in common, so I need to put an a over here. And what I do to the bottom, I got to do to the top. Just like that 3 in the last problem. Over here, I have an a plus 1. It's the a minus 1 that's missing. And notice now in my denominator, I have an a, I have an a plus 1, and I have an a minus 1, just like I had with those 2's and the 3's in the last problem. What I do to the bottom, I got to do to the top. And now let's look at it as we multiply those denominators. Now when I multiply this top times a, I get 2a squared. When I multiply the denominator times a, and I'm going to leave it in its factored form, a plus 1 times a minus 1. Now over here, when I multiply top times a minus 1, 1 times anything, 1 times the binomial even, is itself a minus 1 over, I have an a, I have an a plus 1, and I have that a minus 1 all the way across. And now what I have is the common denominator. By looking for what's missing, get an a over here, get an a minus 1 over here, that's what gets my denominators to be the same. And what I do to the denominator, I got to do to the numerator. Well, once I have a common denominator, I keep it. And I add the numerators. Combine like terms if possible. In this case, 2a squared plus a, nothing combines, minus 1. Now, this would be the combined fraction, but I've always got to look to reduce. Now, when I had to try factoring this with that 2 in front, my options are, I can do the AC method. 2 times 1, make a table, subtract, find all the factors, split that a term up, divide and conquer, have my 2 groups, factor. I can go through all that if I would like. But remember, what I'm suspecting is one of these is what's going to end up canceling. So, at this point, it's almost a guessing check, and I could be completely wrong. Maybe neither of them go into it. But let's just go ahead and try, just since it's listed first. Maybe a plus 1 is going to be my factor. If a plus 1 were a factor, remember what I would need up here is a 2a, because that's what would give me 2a squared. I would need a minus 1, because remember 1 times minus 1 is what would give me that negative 1. So I've controlled my first term and my constant. But now remember I have to verify that middle term. Look at my outside 2. A times negative 1 is negative a. Look at my inner 2. 1 times 2a is plus 2a. Negative a plus 2a is a positive a. That confirms this is that factored form of my numerator, right? It has nothing directly to do with my answer, but will be that next step in simplifying this fraction. Now remember, had that a plus 1 not worked, I would have immediately tried the a minus 1. It would have affected the signs and possibly coefficients or whatever it may have done. But it may not have worked either. If it did, that would have been the factored form. If it didn't, then remember what that would have meant was this wouldn't simplify any further. And I would have actually been done with an answer. That would have actually been good for me. But the fact that it did factor means something nice too. It means those a plus 1s are going to cancel. I'm left with a 2a minus 1 in the numerator. And I'm left with an a and an a minus 1 in the denominator. And here's the combined fraction.